I'd like to welcome you to the Sustainable Practices for Wisconsin Printers series. This one is Saving Dollars in 2019, Growing Your Profits by Eliminating Landfill Waste webinar. This program is proudly brought to you by the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, the Green Tier program, the SGP program, and the association's Lexicographical Technical Association, the Great Lakes Graphics Association, SGIA, and then the Tag and Label Manufacturing Institute. Thank you again for everybody for their support of the program. The moderator is Joe Lyman. I'm president of Great Lakes Graphics Association. We represent printers, finisher binders, tag and label manufacturers, converters, and packagers throughout the three-state region, Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. A little bit about webcast logistics. All attendees are muted. If you have questions or comments, please unmute yourself and ask the question, or you can always use the chat feature in the sidebar of the program. This webcast is being recorded and will be provided to you in the next couple of days. One thing is I'd like to mention also that if you'd like to ask a question at the end of the webinar, we will try to unmute everyone and you can ask at that time. And of course, information will always be provided by email following the webinar. A little bit about today's agenda, welcomes and introductions. We'll get to that in a moment. We'll do Sustainability Green Printing Partnership. We'll talk about the Green Tier program, why landfill free matters. We'll be responding to recycling market disruption. We'll talk a little bit about printers' journey to landfill free, and Peter Globke will be talking about Fredman Bag's journey, and then we'll have question and answers. At this time, I'd like to introduce all the speakers. We have Rosalind Bandy, who is the VP of Sustainability for TLMI, the Trade Association for North American Label Industry. She has been working in the field of sustainability for 15 years and holds dual master degrees in public administration and environmental science. Second, we have Jennifer Summerall. For the past 3 years, Jennifer Summerall has served as the statewide waste reduction and diversion coordinator for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Previously, Jennifer worked for 17 years as the recycling specialist for Winnebago County, Wisconsin. She is also a present member of the board of directors for the Associated Recyclers of Wisconsin and the National Product Stewardship Institute. Third, we have Peter Globke, who is the Transportation and Warehousing Manager for Fredman Bag and has been in charge of their recycling and waste management program for the last 13 years. Peter has spearheaded for Fredman Bag's transition to landfill free several years ago and still manages the program today. Peter has numerous hobbies, but a few favorites are nature, photography, and home brewing beer. Welcome, speakers. Real quick about the double benefits for Wisconsin printers with the Green Tier and the SGP program. Of course, we partnered with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources several years ago for a charter, and there is a crosswalk between the programs. The Wisconsin Green Tier printer industry charter values partnerships among our industry and the Department of Natural Resources and encourages certifications like SGP and Green Tier that support printers on their sustainability journey. Today's webinar is one example of the charter's work to help printers improve their sustainable business practices. Both Green Tier and SGP programs offer Wisconsin printers the opportunity to reduce their environmental impacts and operational costs through a comprehensive sustainability and environmental management system to continuously improve performance. I encourage you to visit their websites and learn more about how Green Tier and SGP can help you grow your green bottom line. And of course, we will be providing you with information after the webinar as to how you can participate in each program. This time I'd like to welcome Rosalind Bandy, who's going to be presenting why avoiding landfill matters, things to consider. Welcome, Rosalind.
Well, good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to touch on a few topics for consideration that are focused on the why part of this webinar. In particular, why should you care about diverting materials from landfill? I've also included in my slides some references if you care to follow up on any of these topics. So let's get started. Next slide, please. So some things to consider about landfills. When organic materials are sent to landfill, they create methane as they break down. And those organic materials certainly include paper. And if you have read anything about methane, you know that it's 120 times more powerful than CO2 in its capacity to trap heat, and it's the second most common greenhouse gas emitted in the U.S. after carbon dioxide. So especially as the world is racing against time to avoid the worst effects of climate change, it's vital that we figure out a way to rein methane in. And we know there are many landfills that use flaring to capture the methane being emitted. There are also landfills that capture the methane and utilize it as energy for power. But the landfills can measure the methane that they capture, but they can't measure all the methane. And we know also, and this is a graph from the EPA, that landfills are one of the largest emitters of methane in the US and account for about 16% of all methane emitted, after natural gas and petroleum systems at 31%, and enteric fermentation at 27%. And in case you don't know what enteric fermentation is, think cows. So by the time a landfill is sealed, most of the methane has already been released. Next slide, please. So some things to consider about landfills on this slide is that all landfills across the United States are nearing capacity. There's a lot of public information on this. I took this information from the Solid Waste Environmental Excellence Protocol, also known as SWEEP, and you can find it yourself because I've provided that link. And you can see that the Northeast and the Midwest are seeing the most rapid rate of loss in landfill capacity. And this also corresponds to how landfill tipping fees are priced. And I'll give you an example. I live in central New York in a very small town, and our local landfill, which is out in the country, to take materials to that landfill is $110 a ton, and the price continues to go up every year. So I encourage you to take a look at SWEEP. It's an organization with a lot of good information on U.S. landfills, including those landfills in Wisconsin. Next slide, please. An alternative to landfilling is sending materials to waste to energy, or to a company that creates fuel pellets that will ultimately be used in waste to energy. And there are several in the state of Wisconsin. But it's important to remember that waste to energy isn't the be all and end all. It's not recycling. It's not zero waste. In fact, if you look at the standards, for global standards and certification standards for zero waste, you'll find that some allow for a very small percentage of waste to go to waste to energy, and some allow for none to go to waste to energy. So the idea is to really work upstream in avoidance to reduce the amount of waste that you have. Waste to energy is not considered a renewable resource, which is defined as a resource that's not depleted when used, such as solar, wind, geothermal, hydropower, air-sourced power. And waste to energy really should be used for non-recyclable materials only. There are certainly some materials that we use for printing that cannot go to waste to energy, such as PVC, that must be landfilled. But we want to, take care of everything before we go into the disposal of the material. But ultimately, waste to energy has fewer emissions than landfills. And the main thing, I think we've all seen this waste management hierarchy. It's very important to follow this waste management hierarchy through preventing waste, reducing the amount of materials, which ultimately reduces the amount of waste, recycle everything you can, even change the types of materials you're using to materials that can be recycled, and then consider waste to energy for your waste materials, and last of all, disposal in landfill. So now I'd like to turn this over to Jennifer.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So yes, this is Jennifer Summer from the Wisconsin DNR. Thanks very much, Roz. Just to go over my brief remarks, my outline, I want to provide a background on Wisconsin recycling requirements. There are laws pertaining to recycling in the state. Most of my time I will spend on discussing what's been going on over the past couple of years with international recycling markets and the disruptions that has had, and then I'm going to wrap up with some resources. So next slide, please. So first is some background. Wisconsin does require recycling. It is a state law per Chapter 287, so it is not a voluntary program. The state law mandates certain materials that need to be recycled, and those materials are also subsequently banned from landfill disposal. When we look at the container side of things, items that must be recycled include glass, aluminum, steel, tin, and plastic containers. The plastics are just number 1 and number 2 plastics. On the fiber side, items that are required to be recycled include newspaper, magazines, corrugated cardboard, and office paper. And then there are also a number of items that aren't traditionally collected in curbside or dumpsters at commercial establishments, but are still included in our law. Things like tires, appliances, electronics, yard waste, lead acid batteries, used oil, and oil filters. You may have been seeing reports and stories from other cities and states in the U.S. of communities discontinuing recycling programs. That is definitely not happening here in Wisconsin. Again, our law requires that every community in the state do provide recycling services to their residents, and further, each Wisconsin community has to have a recycling ordinance, which requires businesses and multifamily properties to provide recycling. Next slide. So the United States is part of a global recycling marketplace. When we look at data from 2016, global scrap exports were worth $70 billion, and we had over 160 million metric tons of recycling in the global marketplace. The United States itself exported 37 million metric tons, worth about $18 billion. Overall, in 2016, 30% of scrap that was produced in the United States was exported to another country, and specifically to China, that was worth about $5.6 billion. When we look at the chart here on this slide, you can see that previously China was buying over 50% of the entire world's paper and fiber materials and plastic scrap, and that has dramatically changed over the past few years. Next slide. So you may have heard this term national sword, and what is that? What does this mean? Well, it's a subsequent program from something that was developed in 2013. At that time, something called Green Fence was implemented by China, which was an import restriction program, and as a result, U.S. exports to China fell by approximately 40%. More recently then, in February of 2017, China announced what was called National Sword, and many in the industry referred to this as Green Fence 2, but it was a much more stricter importation restriction program where it outright bans the importation of certain recyclables. There is a list of things that cannot be imported regardless of the contamination standard. And in addition, for those materials that are still allowed to be imported into the country, they have to meet a new contamination standard of 0.5%. And this is unlike other global standards for these commodities, and it's also very, very difficult to attain that low of a contamination rate and even measure it. Next slide, please. So why has China implemented this National Sword program? There were two main reasons that have been identified. One is that China is seeking to prohibit the import of, quote, solid waste with major environmental hazards and intense public reaction by the end of 2017. So there's two key points there. One, the major environmental hazards. Unfortunately, not all of the materials that were being imported into China were quality recyclables. There were reports of garbage or hazardous waste that were mixed in with recyclables, and they weren't getting quality materials. The second part of that, the intense public reaction, the screenshot here of a video, this is a documentary, The Plastic China, and what this documentary did was look at the plastic recycling industry in China, and unfortunately it didn't painted in a very favorable light. As we understand it, leadership in China's government viewed this documentary and felt that it, again, painted the nation in a negative way and something they didn't like and wanted to make changes as a result. The second goal is to increase their own domestic recovery, which this makes sense. They have not typically been recycling as much as we have in the United States, and they want to start recovering more of their own materials. Next slide, please. So I've been paying close attention to this with the impacts that it has on Wisconsin and our recycling programs. I just wanted to go over the timeline briefly of some of the things that have occurred. As I mentioned, 2017 is when this really began, and China began countrywide inspections and also began revoking permits that were necessary to import materials into the country. We really started to feel the pain in the United States in October of 2017 when prices for OCC, which is old corrugated containers, basically cardboard, plummeted in the U.S. It was as of January 1, 2018, that 24 specific categories of materials became banned from importation to China. And on March 1st, even those materials that were allowed to continue to be imported were subject to a carried waste standard or a contamination standard of 0.5%. Also in that same month is when a program called Blue Sky was initiated by China, and this was their customs agents really focusing on these inspections. They began inspecting at ports that didn't typically do inspections and just really stepped it up with the number of staff and resources looking at what they called the combating smuggling of foreign garbage. Next slide. Then moving into the future, we found that 2018 also marked a change when China stopped importing this material. Where was it going? So many other Southeast Asian countries began to increase dramatically the amount of material that they were taking. But not surprisingly, these countries are much smaller. They could not accommodate this. They didn't have the infrastructure to accept all of this paper and plastic that were coming into their ports. So they began implementing their own import restrictions to bring that back in line. We did also hear in 2018 that these restrictions were impacting Chinese businesses. We did hear that mills in China needed to take downtime because they weren't getting enough fiber to feed their facilities. One of the largest paper mills in China is Nine Dragons, and so as a result of being unable to import feedstock, they announced in August of 2018 that they were buying a paper mill in West Virginia to produce pulp that then they could use to make fiber-type products. And also in that same month, we heard announcements that plastic companies were opening facilities in Georgia and South Carolina. a couple of months later, Nine Dragons announced it would spend $300 million on various recycling pulp lines in the United States. Next slide. So what has been the impact of all of this activity in 2017 and 2018? Well, when we look at the imports into China, for plastic in particular, it fell by 99% when we look at 2017 to 2018 data. Paper imports fell by about 33%. On a positive note, Waste Management announced that they were investing $110 million in its recycling infrastructure in 2018, despite this market upheaval, recognizing that recycling was still important and part of their future plans for their business in the United States. Waste Management and other material recovery facilities, MRFs, which are the processors of recyclables, began improving their technology. They were installing robotic systems and infrared optical sorters and others so that they could produce higher quality recyclables. Just this year, India announced that they would be following suit with China and other Southeast Asian countries by instilling import restrictions on plastics. And then also in March of this year, our export figures were revealed for 2018, and it did show that paper exports did actually pick up a little bit compared to 2017. I suspect that facilities were able to figure out how to meet that contamination rate and were able to move more fiber, but plastic exports were still down 35%. Next slide. So what do we do now? And this first bullet really talks to what Roz was talking about earlier. Our state recycling law does also include a waste management hierarchy, and it specifically identifies reduce, again, as your top choice, then reuse if possible, recycle, compost if it's an organic type material, waste to energy, and then finally landfilling. When we do recycle, it's really important to understand what you can recycle in your local program. It does vary from different parts of the state and from state to state. So knowing before you throw what you can put in your recycling dumpster is critical. We don't encourage what we call wish cycling, and that's when you're not quite sure if something can be recycled. You hope it can, so you put it in your recycling bin anyway. A lot of communities are also focusing on back to basics education. We were able to expand the types of materials that were recycled in the past when there were additional markets. Some communities are just trying to focus now back on basic recycling education, cans and bottles, cardboard and paper and things like that. Also, to maximize the value of your recyclables, it's critical that they are clean and dry and contaminant-free. The picture here on the screen actually shows what happens when plastic bags are put into recycling systems. So whether that's your curbside recycling cart or commercial dumpsters that end up as single-stream processing facilities, these bags and other wraps and film will intertwine with their disc screens, and literally they have to be cut out manually and significantly impact their processing. Finally, it's important to remember that recycling is still key, despite the fact that the materials that are produced are worth less than they had been years ago. They provide valuable feedstock to industry, including right here in Wisconsin, where there are, a very strong paper mill industry. We also are hearing about domestic infrastructure expansions, again, here in Wisconsin, Green Bay Packaging, and elsewhere in Ohio, Indiana, and New York. And again, in Wisconsin, recycling is still the law. We haven't done anything to change our recycling law. We still expect that this activity is important and will occur in the state. Next slide. And this is my final slide. I just wanted to end with some resources that I hope will be helpful. One of them is the Wisconsin Recycling Markets Directory. This is an online searchable database that is funded by the Wisconsin DNR and produced by UW Green Bay. There are various categories that you can select, things like paper or plastics or more unusual materials like, say, construction and demolition, and then further choose from a list of subcategories, and a map will come up identifying different locations, et cetera, for you to explore. Another statewide resource is Recycle More Wisconsin. This provides statewide recycling educational resources. Wisconsin DNR, we also try to provide tools and resources on recycling. If you are looking for, say, a poster on recycling to hang or some signage on what can and can't be recycled, the samples at the top of this slide are a couple of the signs that we have that can be gotten from that website. And in addition, if you're looking for additional recycling processing options, Wisconsin DNR maintains a list of those processors, our MRFs, at our website. They're required to certify with us, so we do have a list of those if you wanted to explore other options. And finally, a national or really international resource is ISRI, Scrap Recycling Industries, and they have a number of different tools that can be valuable. I'm linking directly here to their commodity search tool, so if you do have something that you want to identify different buyers for it, that's a great tool. They also have a membership directory, and ISRI is also who sets the specifications for recyclables in the international marketplace, so it was unusual again when China set their own, but if you wanted to know what % of contamination could be in a bale of a particular type of fiber, they're the ones who set those standards, and those are typically followed by mills throughout the United States and world. So thank you for taking the time to listen here, and I will go ahead and turn it over to Peter for his case study.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I'd like to thank Rosalind as well. Unlike the two ladies who spoke before me, I'm not an expert in the field. I'm just someone who championed our transition. And it's always fun when I learn something new while I'm waiting for my turn to speak. So it's fantastic. Next slide. So our organization, Fredman Bag, started out in 1889, so we've been around for a little bit. And we actually started out as a recycler before recycling was a buzzword or it was cool. Our organization actually got its start. The first president and CEO of our company went around to companies in the area, whether they be chocolate manufacturers or companies that were doing soda in the area, and they would buy those bags and find ways to reuse them and resell those things. So they would buy things like burlap sacks from chocolate companies or sisal bags or cloth sugar bags, and then in the 20s and 30s, paper bags that were back then, they would be, 10 layers thick with just little glue dots on them. And we would cut the glue dots out and take the top layer off, and then we could reprint them and reuse them. Some of these, we would purchase from agricultural or food companies, and, we'd bring them in and we'd sort them by size, and then we would vacuum those things out with a huge 20-foot vacuum that would suck these bags inside out, and then, they'd flip it over and have that thing suction back up, and then they'd reuse these bags. And, they'd reuse them 10, 15 times sometimes, because back then we weren't such a throwaway society. So, and, some of them we would cut stitching out or just simply turn inside out. So we'd end up reusing those things. Next slide. So, since we're a company that was based off of that, we thought, and we've slowly implemented systems to go from being a landfill company that would just recycle our plastics and paper and cardboard to go completely landfill free. So, what steps did we have to go through to become landfill free? The first thing we had to do was kind of assess everything. How much is this going to cost? How much work is it going to be? How much training is going to be involved? We had to identify all of our materials based on what could be recycled, what couldn't be recycled, what types of materials are they? Are there traditional recycling ways for this or not? We had to find a partner to recycle with. We had to decide, are we going to do 7 different companies that we're going to work with, or we're going to try to do something all in one. Then we had to get buy-in, not just from the heads of our organization or the management staff, but also from our employees, because you can have the best intentions in the world, but if the employees aren't going to help out with it, you're going to be in a world of hurt. And then storage and transportation. How are we going to store these things in our facility, outside our facility? How are we going to train people? And not just our staff, but also our customers, our suppliers, upper management. And then how are we going to audit the system to make sure everything was working and running smoothly? And if not, how are we going to fix those things? And then how are we going to follow up with our recyclers, with our employees to let them know how we're doing on that? And then for reporting, not just to the DNR, but to ourselves. You know, how are we doing on this program? Are there improvements that we can make? Next slide. So the first step for us was assessment. You know, we had to assess the situation. We had to assess our company's willingness to do this, because, you know, I won't say never, but most companies aren't going to do a program like this if they're going to lose money. So you have to assess whether or not that's going to be worth the time, and again, assess whether or not employees are going to do this and how to get them to buy into that. The time that it's going to take to do this. You know, anybody who's done a time and material study knows that, you know, yeah, you're going to spend money on materials, but how much labor are we going to use on this? How much time are our employees going to be doing this when they could be doing something else? And we, you know, the cost of landfilling versus the cost of recycling. You know, we were, as I think it was Jennifer stated, or was it, I believe it was Rosalind, I'm sorry, stated that, you know, these costs of landfilling, these materials go up and up and up every year. So, you know, what might cost you $120 a ton to landfill today, next year is $130, $140, $150, and so on down the road. And what are the costs and values of the materials you're recycling? And looking at all those costs, you know, what's going to be the better option? And then storage and transportation. You know, are we going to store this stuff in our facility? I mean, nobody wants garbage just sitting in their facility, right? I mean, one of the things that we do here is we do composting. Well, if you have a big bin of compost, you don't really want that in your facility if you're doing food packaging like we're doing. So, you know, that stuff has to be stored elsewhere where it's not going to create problems. For us, we have a recycling trailer that we have big Gaylord boxes that we store it. And, you know, we've got bug screens and whatnot in between that and our facility. And then transportation, you know, are you going to keep this local, or are you going to ship this stuff out of state? If you're shipping out of state, you know, you have to also factor in the diesel fuel and the transportation and all of that and what that's doing to the environment as well, because if you're trying to do something environmentally friendly, you're going to try and stay as friendly as possible. Next slide. So for the material identification, you know, we had to go through each and every item that we have in our facility and decide whether we can recycle it, whether we can reuse it, or whether we can repurpose it. You know, with some of our items like broken pallets, what do you do with a broken pallet? So for us, you know, it's wood. Obviously, it can be recycled, but we can actually reuse most of those in our recycling process, because a lot of companies will look at whether or not they're going to do a compactor or Gaylord boxes. For us, it was just more cost effective, more better for our time and for the size of our facility just to use Gaylord boxes. So we have Gaylord boxes that separate everything throughout our facility, and we can reuse those pallets underneath those boxes. And, you know, some items can be repurposed, you know, cardboard sheets that come in on material. Well, we can reuse those as layer sheets or on top of pallets of finished product that we're sending out, provided they're clean. And then how do we teach our employees how to identify materials? Because it's one thing to have a converter or a press operator know the difference between polyethylene and polypropylene film, but what about customer service? What about the material handlers? What about the maintenance staff? Do they know these things? So we need to make sure that all of our employees are trained and how to identify those things. And then how do we identify those things for our recycler? Because our recycler, yeah, they know a lot of different products, but they might not know our specific products. So what we had to do was go through each and every one of those things with them and identify those things to our recycler, and then make sure that we're tagging those things clearly before they go onto our recycling trailer. So if it's polyethylene film, the Gaylord has a tag on it that states that it's polyethylene film, and so on and so forth. And then storage. What we did was our recycler provides us a trailer that they spot in one of our docks, and we store all of our Gaylords on that trailer. That way it's out of sight, out of mind, and it's not in the facility, and makes things look a little bit nicer. And then it makes it much easier when they have to go and pull it, because they can just grab the trailer, drop a new one, and go. Next slide. So recycling partners. We're actually on our second recycling partner at this point. The first one that we had was an out-of-state recycler. They were all in one. They did a good job for us. They helped us with our transition from landfilling some products to going completely landfill free, and they were very helpful in that, helping us find which materials could be composted, how to change out some of our materials. So for instance, we switched from using just standard paper plates and napkins and forks and knives and spoons and things of that, and cups and things of that nature in our employee lunchroom, over to compostable items. Why? It makes it much easier if somebody's eating something and they've got a little bit left, and they can just throw that into the compost bin, as opposed to having to scrape that off and then put the paper product into another bin, and now it's tainted with food products, and now it creates problems on the other end for the recycler, right? So it's much easier to be able to throw that into just a compost bin. So if you can make things easy for employees, obviously they're going to be much more liable to follow those things. And currently we work with Waste Management, who's also done a great job for us. We were looking at the transportation costs and the cost of the fuel and everything else, and we just felt like working with a local recycler would be much better for the environment and much better for us as an organization, because we would get a little bit better service, because we don't have to wait as long for their trailers to be swapped out and whatnot. So looking at that, we had to decide, was it going to be better to separate everything with individual recyclers or go with an all-in-one? Well, our facility is not big enough to have 7 trailers spotted with different materials going to different recyclers, so it was just much better for us to look at a single recycling partner. Next slide. So how do we get buy-in? With the company, obviously financial is the first buy-in. You have to be able to show your organization that it's financially feasible and you're not going to lose money on this. And when we went through the process, we actually found that we had items that we were either landfilling or recycling at zero profit that we could actually see a return on. So when we were going through those items to go landfill free, we actually found several items that we weren't seeing a return on. And so it actually increased our profitability. And then with employees, you have to show them why it's good for them. If they've got kids, you explain to them, hey, it helps the environment for that. It's more profitable for the company. So, down the road, it helps when you're looking for a pay raise. And we do some value-added things here as well. What we used to do was every year on Earth Day, we would do an electronic recycling and a paper shredding for people to bring old paper and documents in to where it would be securely shredded and then recycled. And at this point, we've just kind of set that up as, hey, whenever you need to, you can bring those items in and we recycle it. It's just one of the bonuses of working here and one of the bonuses of having that program. And then with suppliers and vendors, you have to let them know why they should bother helping. You know, with one of our suppliers, the supplier for the plates and napkins and forks and spoons, well, they get to sell us new products, so they have new product lines. They're making a little bit more money from us. And, you know, for vendor or for even for our customers, we've had customers that have called us up in the past and said, hey, we've got all of these bags that we want to get rid of. You know, can we ship them back to you so that we don't have to dump them in landfill? You know, that just getting people thinking that is very, very helpful. Next slide. So then storage and transportation. You know, there's a couple of different ways we could have done this. We could have brought in a compactor unit and put that in place and, you know, reduce the amount of truck shipments that we're doing. With us, we just found it was more cost effective, and with the amount of material that we're sending out of our facility, you know, we're only swapping out trailers every couple of weeks by doing gaylords, whereas if we were compacting stuff, it would probably be, you know, every 6 weeks or so. However, then you've got, we would have compostables and whatnot that would be rotting on the back of a trailer for 6 weeks, as opposed to, you know, every couple of weeks getting into a recycling facility. And then, you know, again, you have to look at whether or not you're going to work with an out-of-state or an in-state company, because again, transportation is key to those things, and it can also eat into your profitability if you're looking at it from a company standpoint. And then, you know, as far as the recycler or the company, you know, are we going to provide the transportation? Are they going to provide the transportation? Those are all things that have to be discussed and negotiated when you're bringing those companies in, and some companies will provide that transportation. Our company, Waste Management, provides the transportation. They provide the gaylords, you know, and if we needed them, they would provide the pallets. However, we found that we don't need them because we're able to recycle the ones that we have that are maybe missing a slat as gaylord pallets. And then, do we have any special materials or site-specific requirements that, you know, would need to be followed? For us, we're a food-grade facility, so obviously we couldn't have compostables or food product on the floor. So we have to have gaylords for those on the recycling trailer that are kept outside of our facility. Next slide. So then when it comes to training, you know, at the company, you're training your bosses as to, and the owners or stockholders as to, hey, here's why it's profitable, here's why it's beneficial. For us, we found that it was actually, it saved us money by not having the pickup and the landfill fees and the transportation fees from the carriers that were, you know, when Waste Management was hauling this stuff to landfill. And not only that, you know, anything that you dump into landfill, you're responsible for. So, you know, sometimes those things can come back to bite you as well. And then employees, you know, we had initial training with employees of, hey, here's what we're going to be doing, and here's why, and taking them through step by step of how we were going to do it, what items needed to be recycled, and where, and what bins. And, you know, I mean, with us, we even color-coded bins. For single stream for us is blue, and, you know, engineered fuel, which is the waste to energy, those are color-coded bins yellow. It just makes things a lot easier. And then after we had been doing it for a while, you know, we did follow-up training to let people know, okay, here's how we're doing, here's what we're doing wrong, here are the things we need to clean up. And then we also have refresher training every single year so that every employee gets retrained on this because, you know, over time people have a tendency to forget. You know, I get questions on a regular basis. Hey, what bin does this go into, and what bin does that go into? And that brings you back to making sure that you find the right company to work with, because again, I'm no expert like Rosalind and Jennifer, so many times somebody brings something to me and I say, boy, I don't know what to do with that either. Let me call Waste Management. Let me talk to them and see how they think we should recycle this. Next slide. So that leads to auditing and follow-up and reporting. So, you know, for auditing the program, we have to take a look at partnering with our recycler. They let us know things they're seeing on their end. We are making sure that we're checking through our bins and whatnot, that things are in the right bins, that they're dumped into the right location, that people are doing the things that they've been trained to do. So, you know, we're doing our own internal, and then once stuff gets out to Waste Management, they're going through it again, and then they're reporting back to us with, hey, we found compostables in your single stream, or we found single stream in your compostable bin, you know, and then they'll send us pictures, and then we can go back to our employees and staff at the next training and say, okay, here's what we're finding, here's what we need to do a better job on. And again, that leads into the follow-up with the employees. We need to make sure that we're retraining and retraining and retraining and make sure that they understand how those things should be recycled, where those things should go, and why. And then reporting, you know, at the end of the year, we do a report for Green Tier listing all of our items that we've recycled and what those tonnages are that have been recycled, and it does also list our waste to energy, you know, and as the year goes on, and as each year goes by, you know, we learn more and more of the items that we have occasionally in waste to energy can actually be recycled in other ways as we go through these things. Or some of the items that, say, we put into single stream, we find if we separate some of those items out, we can see a higher profit margin on those, as opposed to Waste Management having to sort all those things out and incur all those costs. So reporting back and reporting those things kind of gives you a 5,000-foot view, so to speak, of kind of how you're doing at the end of the year with that, and it lets you kind of audit the system a little bit better. And then, you know, we're reporting that back to our employees when we're doing the training. You know, any customer that would want to know, you know, we'd let them know as well, and try to tell them, hey, we recycle, and hey, you know, we try to be landfill free, so if you guys ever have anything, you know, please let us know. We might be able to help you with that. And then, you know, obviously, again, to the DNR as part of the Green Tier. Next slide. So at the end of the day, why do we do it? As a business, financial has to be number one. Again, very few companies are going to do this if they're going to take a loss on it. I will never say none, however, in my mindset, most won't do it unless there's a financial benefit to them doing so. Again, customers, we work in the plastics industry, so being able to say to our customers, hey, we don't landfill anything, we don't dump anything into landfill, we recycle whatever we can, and whatever can't be recycled one way or another, we turn waste to energy. And so it's one of those things that can kind of set us apart occasionally with customers. Some customers care about such things, some don't. And then with our partnership with Green Tier, we're constantly looking for ways to be more environmentally friendly and better stewards of the environment and our planet. And, you know, finally, anyone who has children out there or grandkids, you know, we want them to have clean air and clean water and those things 20, 30, 40 years from now. And unless we do a better job of being stewards of the environment and the planet, we may not have grandkids who can go swimming in clean water. So those are the reasons that we do it. And I thank you all very much for your time.
Well, at this time, I'd like to ask if anybody has any questions. You can either use the chat feature, and at the risk of complete chaos, I'm going to unmute everyone. Well, I appreciate everybody's time today. Again, we're having this recorded, and I should have the edited file for you in the next couple days, and you will receive an email with chock full of information about the Green Tier Program, SGP, as well as that recorded webinar. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a great day.